Hello, it's Aaron here in a very blustery East Lothian for the 5th video update of the What If 2 interactive wargame campaign brought to you by the Battle of Prestonpans Heritage Trust. Now, I know it's not that long since the last video update, but since there have been important things taking place, I thought I'd better update you as soon as I could. So I'm going to bring to you the latest information from the sieges of Stirling and Edinburgh. Let's have a look then at Elphinstone's 1744 survey of Scotland, and we can see in the centre of this portion of it the Forth estuary leading up towards Stirling. We've got the red garrison there, now encircled and under siege by the blue Jacobite forces. Similar situation down in Edinburgh, further down the estuary, and then right the way round on the North Sea coast we there have at Berwick-on-Tweed the assembling Dutch regiments under the Count of Nassau. So that's our situation, the Jacobites having decided to lay siege to the two most important fortifications in Scotland simultaneously. After considerable discussion on our Facebook group, the British team decided they were not only going to try and hold the castle of Stirling, but also the walled town itself, holding up the Jacobites, forcing them to take the town before they could commence military operations against the castle. It was hoped perhaps that this would stretch the Jacobites too far. Maybe they don't have the time to go through this process, knowing there's a ticking clock as British forces strengthen down on the other side of the border. With this in mind, on the 10th and 11th of October, some serious operations commenced around Stirling, and it's that I need to bring you up to date on. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the site of Stirling Castle, sitting on its dominating rock overlooking all of the surrounding landscape and the town that creeps up towards its gates. Now, that town is defended by medieval walls. You can see a picture of them here on the left and my attempt to replicate them on the tabletop. The walls built right onto the bedrock, making them very difficult to take by storm. It's not going to be an easy job for the Jacobites to try and take these walls, but the whole of the city's circuit isn't surrounded, and so there are possibilities for a Jacobite assault on the town. Now, Stirling, unfortunately, sits right on the boundary of General Roy's military surveys of the Highlands and the Lowlands, so I have to bring the two maps together here in a slightly clumsy way, but hopefully it gives you an impression of the landscape and allows us to see the arrangement of the forces at the beginning of the siege of Stirling. You can see the Jacobites have brought two regiments up to Cambus Barron there, largely to neutralise Gardiner's dragoons, who'd been kept out of this town in the hope they might be able to disrupt Jacobite siege operations. Two other regiments are at St Ninians, although they've started moving forwards from there quite soon after setting up their base to start threatening the south end of the town, and two more over at Kerse Mill, over on the right-hand side there. Right at the top of the map, on the other side of the Forth, you can see the arrival of Frasers of Lovat's. It's a new regiment that's just marched down all the way from Inverness, and there would have been over there in support of them a small unit of Glenbuckets, but they've been detached off to Perth on their way to Montrose to collect some guns, heavy guns that have been delivered by the French and are now needing an escort to bring them down towards the siege. So this is our situation as it was on the 8th, 9th and the morning of the 10th of October. Now, over the course of the 9th to the 10th of October, our British team started to have some doubts about the wisdom of having their entire force in Scotland bottled up inside the fortress and town of Stirling. And so a decision was made to try and at least sneak Argyle's militia out of the city. They were able to do so, and they were protected by Gardiner's dragoons once they were out of the walls and escorted off towards the west. So that's one unit out to safety. But the idea that more redcoat units might try to escape from the castle and therefore create a problem for the Jacobites in their rear encouraged them to step up their operations. And the first thing they did was to move part of their Clandonald division across the River Forth through the Abbey Ford to occupy the area around Cambus Kenneth Abbey, as you can see here, moving into the Abbey ruins, the Glengarrys and Keppoch's regiments. So just to put that onto the map, we see the movement over the Abbey Ford of the Clan Donald there. They took 2 regiments across initially on the operation, just in case it was defended, but it wasn't. So one of the regiments was immediately dispatched back to its earlier position. The main reason for putting a regiment on this side of the river was so that they could, if necessary, reinforce the Frasers if the Redcoats tried to get any more of their regiments out of Stirling, over Stirling Bridge, and escape to the north. The Jacobites don't want anybody escaping out of Stirling. Nevertheless, as we can see on this map, Gardiner's dragoons are now escorting the Argylls to safety out of the way of the siege. So this is the situation at the end of the 10th of October, as things have started moving towards a climax. Very lucky, thanks to the National Library of Scotland, to have this fantastic map of the town and castle of Stirling as it was at the time. The castle is the area over there to the right of your screen, as you can see, and we've left the invalid garrison in place within the castle to hold the gates. The walls of the town, then, you can see running along the rocky area at the bottom of your screen there, and the main gate is the Barrows Yett, which we have occupied with half of Lee's regiment. The second half is holding the Dirt Row Port just adjacent to it. Now, the other side of the town is largely open. It relies on the density of the housing and of the garden walls to give it protection on that side. We've got the Glasgow militia holding the St Mary's Wynd there and barricading the street over here at Friars Wynd. And we've used the Stirling Gentlemen Volunteers to occupy one of the gates on the wall, whilst the other gate down at Cowan's Hospital is garrisoned by the regular troops out of the garrison. So it's not a large force that's holding the town. Argylls might have been quite useful if we knew an escalade was coming, but they are spread quite thinly over the length of the townscape. Our Jacobites on the 11th of October then decided they were going to launch a limited assault on the town, just focusing on this end, on the Barrows Yett. And they don't have a lot of troops available for this operation because some of them are still sealing the town from the north side and some of them are still posturing in front of the opposite side in the hope that it would draw some of the garrison's attention that way. The only units available at this end are Appin's, Cameron's and the MacDonalds of Glengarry. They do have the Jacobites' only available artillery battery here at Stirling at the moment, the rest of the guns still being engaged in the siege at Edinburgh. The plan was to launch the main attack on the Barrows Yett, blow the gate with the artillery, and then storm it with the Camerons, with the Appins in support. That would allow the Jacobites to get up behind Lee's regiment. And at the same time, Glengarry would either come down against Lee from the other side or would circle round against the Glasgow militia in the hope of routing that unit and closing off the streets behind so that Lee's could not escape. One of the main objectives of this operation was not just about taking the town, but was also about trying to whittle down the number of units that Sir John Cope has available at this siege. So putting those positions onto the tabletop, at the top left you can see part of the Glasgow militia barricading themselves onto Friars Wynd, half of Lee's regiment at the Dirt Raw also barricaded in place, and in the strongest position Lee's remaining soldiers at the Barrows Yett holding the main gate into the town where the main attack is expected. And just taking a sort of bird's eye view across Stirling here then from above the Barrows Yett, Lee's regiment holding this main gate. And as you can see, once you're through that gate, you either have to funnel your way up the densely populated street or up through the backyards and gardens to get up towards the castle that way. So the Jacobites begin their attack, as you would expect, by opening fire on the gates of the Barrows Yett. Now, there are no cannon mounted at this end of the walls, so they're able to bring the guns relatively close, as long as they stay out of musket range. Unfortunately for the Jacobites, those are quite light guns. These are the ones captured from General Cope at the Battle of the Alum Water, and so they take quite a while to make an impression on the gate. Meanwhile, Glengarry's regiment, under the overall command of Kepark, starts to move through the fields on the far side of the town towards the Friar's Wynd. For a couple of turns, the Jacobites have still failed to actually blow that gate with artillery, so feeling a little bit frustrated, the Camerons start to move their way round towards the right, whilst the Appins focus on the barrows yet with the artillery. Looking back at the map to see what that gives us, we can see the Glengarrys are moving up towards Friar's Wynd, and the Camerons have swung round towards the Dirt Row. Appins have moved round into a position supporting the battery, from which they can either make an assault on the barrows yet when they get the opportunity, or they can move up in support of the Cameron assault if that proves more successful. Trusting in their valour and their strength in numbers, the Clan Cameron men surge forwards towards the Dirt Row, where Lee's regiment hoped to be able to hold them off against the odds. And after a brief but intense fight, the Camerons are actually pushed back, driven away from the gate with some losses. In fact, so concerning are the losses that the prince himself rides over to the Clan Cameron in order to rally them and steady their nerves before sending them in against the gate again. Because the Jacobites are spread so thin, they don't have the option of support or replacement units for any of these assaults. If any one of them is held up for too long or is driven back too many times, then the whole operation is likely to fail. Meanwhile, however, the Glengarrys are making unopposed progress across the open ground beyond the town, moving towards Friar's Wynd and the awaiting Glasgow militia. And no sooner are they in position than the MacDonalds surge on up towards the barricade, where they are held by the Glasgow militia, just a small unit facing a full force of that Jacobite charge, but their barricade is giving them enough protection to neutralise the assault down the narrow frontage of the streets. Back down at the barracks yet, though, the Jacobite artillery has finally blown the gates, and now there is the opportunity for the Appins to come in and actually get inside the town, the first unit likely to be able to do so. And as it looks like the gate is becoming untenable, the defenders from Lee's regiment pull down off the walls and take up a position in the gardens immediately beyond, hoping they'll be able to fire into the flank of any assaulting column of Appins. The Appins aren't going to hang around either. As soon as they see the gate is blown, they surge up and through the barracks yet and into Stirling. They turn and they charge into the defenders from Lee's regiment, heavily outnumbered these men, but they gallantly hold on. Remember, these are the heroes of the Battle of the Allen Water who managed to fight their way out of the battlefield as the rest of the army collapsed, so we should expect some gallantry. And sure enough, although they are charged by the Appins and driven back, they are not broken, and it looks like there'll be a long protracted fight across the gardens of Stirling. The rest of Lee's men over at the Dirt Row, they are now concerned that their flank is potentially exposed now that the Jacobites can get into the town behind them, and so they withdraw up the street away from their barricades so as to be protected by the houses around them. They don't want the Appins coming up behind them in their rear. Much relieved that they don't have to launch another contested assault against the barricades at the Dirt Row, the Clan Cameron now advance cautiously towards the streets of Stirling. So here's our new position. The Clan Cameron have taken the Dirt Row and have penetrated the town from that side. Appins have managed to get through and are driving into the town, into the gardens, and the Jacobites are bringing the artillery battery up through the barrows yet with the intention of, if necessary, using that battery to clear Lees from the street without the difficulties of a street fight between them and the Camerons. Meanwhile, the Glengarrys are still engaged with the Glasgow militia. They are hoping that they'll be able to break through there and cut off the retreat of Lee's regiment. Meanwhile, many of Lee's men are withdrawing in good order up the street. Their objective is now to get back towards the castle and into the protection of its walls. You can see on the left there, the Glasgow militia still engaged with Glengarry's men at Friar's Wynd. If they can hold for long enough, then Lee's men will be able to withdraw to safety. And here in the battle for the gardens of Stirling, Lee's men have been driven back into the gardens and disordered, which means they're not able to withdraw any further at this stage. They have taken substantial casualties too. Stuarts of Appin don't really want to fight through this difficult terrain hand to hand, and so they begin exchanging in a firefight through the gardens with Lee's defenders. This crucial moment where it's still possible that enough men will get back to the safety of the castle walls, the Glasgow militia are finally overwhelmed at the barricades. They are broken. And this is the worst possible situation for the defenders, because now, as you can see, Lee's regiment has men stuck in the middle of the street with the Clancameron coming at them from one side, and now the Glengarrys coming at them from the other. Trapped in this position, driven back and disordered by the charge of the Glengarrys, these men are forced to surrender. And as that surrender is dealt with on the street there, Glengarrys are able to filter through into the gardens and close off the retreat for the remaining men of Lee's. And here we see them trapped in this rather pleasant-looking garden with the Glengarrys to one side and the Appins to the other, and rather than fight to destruction for no purpose, they surrender honourably. As you can see, looking at the wider picture then, as the Jacobites have secured the lower half of Stirling, it's now impossible for the defenders of the upper town to hold, and so what remains of the Glasgow militia withdraws up the marketplace, as do the gentlemen volunteers and the regulars from the garrison withdrawing from Cowan's Hospital too. All of those units able to escape towards the safety of the castle before the Jacobites are able to pursue them. And so here's our situation at the end of the 11th of October. The Jacobites have taken the town. The garrison in the castle now comprises 4 small units, 1 of invalids, 1 of regulars, 1 of militia, and 1 of gentlemen volunteers. Thus, the siege of Stirling town comes to a rapid end, and the siege of Stirling Castle can now begin. The only good news for our British team after this is that the outcomes roll for the battle determines that the Jacobites are so exhausted by their success that any units directly involved in the operation are so tired they need at least 3 days to recuperate before being able to move out. This is important because the Jacobites do have other issues to concern themselves with, notably over at the siege of Edinburgh. Now, as you can see here, we still have 2 Jacobite units over at Canvas Baron, 1 at Campus Kenneth, and the Frasers of Lovat up there at Causeway side that are not engaged in this operation. These are the only units available for the Jacobites to redeploy and send towards Edinburgh should they wish to do so. And of course, they do need to think about doing this because there is a threat to their siege lines at Edinburgh. After much negotiation, transportation, and deliberation, Count Nassau now has 4 regiments of Dutch regular troops at Berwick and a squadron of Hamilton's dragoons. Now, there were 3 ways by which they could hope to march to relieve the siege at Edinburgh Castle. There was the main road up through Dunbar and Haddington. There was the branch that took around the north coast of East Lothian, which would allow them to keep in contact with the Royal Navy in the Firth of Forth in case anything changed dramatically. And there was a slightly longer route that went inland, which would at least bring them in from an unexpected direction potentially. Now, the debates for this were quite considerable, but eventually the route taken was the middle road. This road and the coast route were both guarded by Jacobite cavalry pickets, and so Nassau's approach was detected. The only way they could have been undetected was if they had gone through Lauderdale on that inland borders route. That opportunity was missed, but that meant that the Jacobites did have pressure to get men from Stirling back to Edinburgh in time to prevent the city from being relieved. Now, Gardiner's dragoons had returned to Stirling to discover it had already been taken, and only the castle was holding out, so they now sought to shadow the Jacobite column In fact, they got ahead of it at Linlithgow briefly and forced the Jacobites to take a detour, delaying them by several hours' march, and then eventually Gardeners were able to rush round the south side of Edinburgh. So we now turn our attention back to the siege of Edinburgh Castle, which has been rumbling on for a month now. So both sides are now sending men towards Edinburgh, and this was pretty nail-biting. It really was down to almost the exact hour that they arrived at the same moment. Nassau's men moved up towards the east side of Edinburgh, occupying Holyrood Palace. Meanwhile, Lord George Murray had rushed down, briefly delayed at Linlithgow, and he too came round the south side of Edinburgh because that way at least he could swerve away from the guns of Edinburgh Castle. Now he deployed in ground near Bruntsfield, offering battle to Nassau, who was now reinforced by the arrival of Gardiner's dragoons. But Nassau proved unwilling to risk the only operational infantry force that they now had outside of Stirling and Edinburgh castles, because in order to attack the Jacobites at Bruntsfield, he would have had to expose his flank to a sally from the Jacobite siege lines within Edinburgh. And so instead of fighting it out, and sadly instead of relieving Edinburgh Castle, Nassau decided to withdraw, discretion being the better part of valour, and headed back to the safety of the walls of Berwick-upon-Tweed. Perhaps exposing their own weakness, Lord George Murray and his men decided not to pursue. They instead went straight into the walls of Edinburgh, reinforcing the siege. Not a siege that hoped to breach or escalate the castle walls, but now that it had been running for so long, hoped simply to deprive the garrison of enough supplies and morale to continue holding out. And now, bringing you right up to date, on the morning of the 22nd of October 1745, the guns of Edinburgh Castle's batteries have finally fallen silent. After a month of siege, the garrison, sensing there is no imminent chance of relief after the withdrawal of Nassau's men, has surrendered to the Jacobites. This is a huge boon to the prince's cause, but it by no means ends his troubles, because although Edinburgh Castle has been taken, and although the siege guns that the French had landed at Montrose have now arrived outside Stirling and supporting the siege there, on the same day as the castle pulls down its colours, Marshal Wade marches into Newcastle with a very substantial army of cannon, foot and horse. If that army under Wade can get north and link up with Nassau's regiments, then surely the British government has an army big enough at last to finish off this Jacobite threat. So the Jacobites have got a lot of planning and thinking to do now as Marshal Wade commences his march northwards towards Berwick-upon-Tweed. Are we entering the end phase of the Jacobite operation? Have they squandered the chance to rush into England by delaying with these siege operations at Edinburgh Stirling? Or has their consolidation operation given them the strength and the confidence to be able to hold Wade off? As always, that remains to be seen. Thank you, as always, for watching and for following the project. Thanks especially to all those who are contributing over on the Facebook group. You can see the details of the group link here below. Lots more exciting events still to come. I look forward to bringing you the next update very soon.